Did you know that the violet plays hide and seek with your senses? And did you also know that in perfumery, we extract the oil not from the flower, but from the leaf? Let's dive into this episode of The Violet in our fragrance materials season. The violet leaf oil is actually extracted from the leaves of the Viola odorata, which is prized in perfumery for its unique green, earthy and slightly floral notes. And this is a complete contrast from the sweet powdery fragrance of violet flowers. Now, we extract the oil through either CO2 extraction or solvent extraction. But the violet leaf oil adds depth, freshness and complexity to a perfume, making it ideal for green, floral and chypre scents. I've seen a few videos on YouTube with people taking violet flowers from their garden and using a method called enfleurage, where you soak the flowers in fat. Now, traditionally, they used animal fat for this process, but these days they use vegetable fat. I've seen some people use shea butter. I've seen some people use refined odorless coconut oil. But this is not the way that we do it really in perfumery, because the leaves are more commonly used because of the cost effectiveness and the efficiency of the extraction process. So violet flowers, the oil yield is so tiny, this makes this absolute much more expensive than the oil that comes from the leaf, and that's why it's less frequently used in perfume. But the leaves and the flowers contain a fragrance chemical known as ionones. So they contain ionones, and you can get alpha ionone and beta ionone. And these ionones are compounds, and they're crucial for their sweet floral aroma that is reminiscent of violets. And these compounds in perfumery are celebrated for their powerful fixative properties, which obviously enhances then a fragrance longevity on the skin. And despite the allure of the beautiful deep purple violet flowers and the classic scent of them, the challenges and the costs of actually extracting it from the flower have led to a preference for violet leaf in modern perfumery. But this preference is also driven by the oil's ability to blend well with other fragrances. So this adds a fresh green character without overpowering the scent profile. For high-end or niche perfumes, violet flowers extracts, they remain valued for the distinctive fragrance, but synthetic ionones often and more often than not used to replicate the violet scent more affordably, but also consistently. So when you get synthetics in perfumery, you get a lot of people that say, well, we prefer the synthetics because they're more consistent than if you were to extract it from the actual raw material, which is true, because if you ask a master perfumer, where is this jasmine from? He'll be able to tell you whether it's from Egypt or whether it's from India. The same with lavender. They'll be able to tell you whether it's from England or France or Bulgaria, perhaps. And the same with the different roses. So it's about remaining consistent, and then perhaps it might depend with raw materials, natural raw materials, on the yield as well. Is another reason why people like to use synthetics, because I remember a few years ago I was dealing with my perfume house in the UK, and they were telling me about the cardamom had a devastating year for crops, for the harvest, and that resulted in the price of the oil exponentially rising, so which of course makes a perfume higher, and that's why a lot of people do tend to prefer synthetics. But when it comes to violets, the violet sweets, I used to have them as a child, tiny little purple sweets, and they were called Parma violets, and they had this violet fragrance in there. But this won't have come naturally. And that's when when people think of violets, they think of that soft, powdery, floral, sometimes it can be quite obnoxious scent, and it can overpower a perfume. So that's why it comes, we like to use it from the leaf. And when people smell it, and they smell, oh, no, this is violet that we use in perfumery. And they'll be like, oh, that doesn't smell like violet. The violet I know that's in the beautiful sweets and the soaps. That's because it's coming from the leaf. So it does have a powdery aroma, and it contains ionones, but in different quantities. So whilst ionones from violet flowers are really highly desirable for that classic violet scent, the practical challenges of extracting the oil and the costs involved limit their widespread use. However, violet flower extracts, such as absolutes and concretes, they are very rarely, but they are still used in perfumery, but they will be reserved for very high-end or niche fragrances due to the expense and the delicate nature of this extraction. And these extracts capture the quintessential violet fragrance that is sweet, powdery and floral. And this offers a different olfactory profile compared to the green and earthy notes of the violet leaf oil. Let's have a look now at some famous perfumes that have embraced these violet themes. Guerlain, Insolence. This fragrance is known for its bold, powdery and somewhat rebellious take on violet, hence the name. Insolence combines violet with iris, another very powdery floral, which doesn't, again, come from the flower, from the iris, known in perfumery as the orris root. It actually comes from the roots. And if it's the real stuff and not synthetic, it actually takes 6 years to make, hence the high price tag of iris, which would be around at least 30,000 euros for 1 kg. I know, shocking. But Insolence also contains raspberry and a hint of red berries, creating a modern and youthful interpretation of the classic flower. Then we have Tom Ford, Métallique. This fragrance envelops its wearers with a veil of aldehydes and powdery notes, where violet is prominently featured alongside, now get this, bergamot, pink pepper, and a creamy base of vanilla and sandalwood. I mean, that sounds like something I want to eat. Even, like a violet ice cream, vanilla. Another famous perfume is by Balenciaga, called Paris, and this is a sophisticated and elegant fragrance. And this perfume showcases violet in a light and airy composition, supported by top notes of pepper and base notes of cedarwood and patchouli, capturing the essence of the modern Balenciaga woman. Then we have Frederic Malle with Lipstick Rose. This perfume, created by Ralph Schweiger, pays homage to the classic image of lipstick with a composition centered around violet and rose, accented with a grapefruit and vanilla to evoke the scent of vintage makeup. Now, how interesting is that? When I go to flea markets in France, and they often sell the vintage powder compacts, and the scent of them are amazing. But one of the nicest fragrances I think I've ever smelt is in a loose powder, and that was by Guerlain. And I was using this in the early 2000s, and it was just divine. And I wouldn't even use it for the beautiful effect, actually, that this loose powder, translucent powder, almost had on my skin. But the fragrance was just a divine way to finish off my makeup. And just to have the scent of vintage makeup and a vintage powder compact. So it's giving this powdery aspect without having that baby powder note. You know, that sickly sweet baby powder note? There's a vast contrast between those two powderinesses. And when you're adding something to a fragrance and you want it to be a bit more grown up than baby powder, then that's the way to go, is with ionones. Another famous perfume is Chanel Monsieur, part of Chanel's L'Exclusive collection, which I have a box of miniatures, which I got in Dubai at Bloomingdale's. I bought them for myself for Christmas and then just gave them to my husband and said, just wrap those up, will you? It was like the last box that they had. In fact, they only had 2 delivered. So I was really lucky to find them. And this fragrance by Chanel is a tribute to the friendship between Gabrielle Chanel and Monsieur Cert. Violet and rose from the heart of this scent with orris, another powdery, and tonka bean. And this provides a powdery, nostalgic warmth. And tonka bean, or the synthetic equivalent of coumarin, just an exquisite fragrance. You know wedding cakes, and they always have marzipan on them? Well, this is kind of what you would get, this almondy scent. You can imagine that this would be the scent of tonka bean, and it provides this comforting, powdery allure to a scent. And then another one is Penhaligon's Violetta, a classic and traditional take on violet, as most Penhaligon's fragrances tend to be. And Violetta is sharp and green at first, with a heart of violet that's both sweet and woody, evoking the Victorian era's fascination with this delicate flower. So can you imagine now if you're using both Ionone and alpha and Ionone beta, which take on the 2 different facets of the violet leaf and the violet flower. Now imagine using both of these in a fragrance. This will give you an all-round scent, but when working with violet, less is more. It will overpower a fragrance. So if it's going to be reminiscent of the sweet, powdery, floral violet, then err on the side of caution when using it. Another fragrance is by L'Artisan Parfumeur, Vert Violet, or Vert Violet, green violet. So this perfume is a lighter, more ethereal take on violet, and blending the flower with green notes and iris to create a delicate, fresh and slightly herbal fragrance that's reminiscent of a spring day. Now, do you notice a pattern here where they're combining violet with iris quite a lot in these fragrances, and that's because they both have these incredible powdery aspects. Now, if you want to use iris, you will probably have to get the synthetic, unless you have the budget, you don't have to buy a kilo. You can buy orris in small, really tiny quantities, but then it only needs to be used in tiny quantities. But one little trick is that you can use carrot seed oil. Now, although carrot seed oil doesn't smell anything like sweet violets, it's what it does to the perfume. It adds this powdery aspect to the fragrance. But again, carrot seed essential oil is very earthy, so you're going to be using it not for the scent, but what it brings to the fragrance, that powdery note. But adding a couple of different powdery fragrances like orris and violet, you're getting different kinds of powderiness in a fragrance, and therefore you're giving it more sophistication and complexity rather than having a perfume that smells like a Parma Violet Sweet. I mean, who wants that? Some people might. Well, I might have done when I was 10, but certainly not anymore. But these fragrances that I've just mentioned, they demonstrate the versatility of violet as a perfume note, capable of evoking a range of emotions. So from nostalgia and elegance to modernity and rebellion. Every scent offers a unique interpretation of violet, highlighting its ability to adapt and shine in various olfactory contexts. So the versatility comes because you're getting the nuances from the leaf and also from the flower. Such a complex fragrance. Let's talk briefly about the history of the violet. And its history is indeed rich and varied, and they hold a significant cultural and medicinal and symbolic meanings across different civilizations and time periods. In ancient Greece and Rome, violets were associated with love and fertility, and they were often used in love potions and were a symbol of Aphrodite, Venus, the goddess of love. Violets were also used to make wine in ancient Greece. But the Romans, on the other hand, used violets to sweeten their wine and as a cooking ingredient. In the Middle Ages, violets were a symbol of humility and modesty, and often referred to as the flower of modesty. And they were used in herbal medicine for their supposed properties to treat a variety of ailments, from headaches to heart conditions. And even in the Renaissance, violets continued to be a popular ingredient in perfumery and were used to scent gloves. In one of our other episodes, we talked about, in Fascinating Facts, episode number 1, I talked about the gloves and the glove industry, the leather industry in Grasse, and it was a fashion trend to have scented gloves. But then if you look at the Victorian era, there's a term called florography, which is the language of flowers. And it's in the Victorian era that florography became popular, and violets were a symbol of faithfulness, modesty, and loyalty. And this gives way to the message, I will always be true. So if you're giving flowers to somebody, perhaps think of the violet and the hidden message behind them of, I'll always be true. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially in France, the town of Toulouse, which is about 2 hours away from where I live, became known for its violet cultivation. And violets were worn as corsages, used in bouquets, and became a motif in jewellery and art. And this period saw the commercial cultivation of violets for the perfume industry, with the flowers being harvested for their scent. But if you go to Toulouse, and you'll see the Violet de Toulouse. I even have a tile that I use for putting hot pans on in my kitchen, and it has the violet on there, and it mentions Toulouse. My friends live in Toulouse, and if you go there to any of the touristy shops, you'll see violet sweets, lots and lots of different varieties of violet sweets, whether they're boiled sweets or little candies. You can also get the soaps and lotions, etc. And they are incredibly popular. But they also have these violet sweets in Grasse as well. But Toulouse is famous for the violet. But even historically, violets were used for, like I mentioned earlier, medicinal purposes, because they were also believed to have antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties. And violet tea was used for respiratory issues. And the leaves were used in salves for conditions, for skin conditioning. So for softening the skin, basically. Now, on YouTube, I have a video which shows you how to make a skin salve. Perhaps this might be something that you want to do and infuse the violet leaves into this salve to help also soften your skin, but also to add a really nice aromatic profile to this odorless balm that I make. And I give the recipe to, and I show you how to make it. I'm going to read an extract now from a book that I have that I highly recommend, and it's by an author named Diane Ackerman, and the book is called A Natural History of the Senses. So I'm going to read directly from the book now. Violet smells like burnt sugar cubes that have been dipped in lemon velvet, I might offer. In a famous letter, Napoleon told Josephine not to bathe during the 2 weeks that would pass before they met, so he could enjoy all her natural aromas. But Josephine also adored violets. She often wore violet-scented perfume, which was her trademark. And when she died in 1814, Napoleon planted violets at her grave. Just before his exile on St. Helena, he made a pilgrimage to it and picked some of the violets and entombed them in a locket which he wore around his neck, and they stayed there until the end of his life. Violet contains ionones, which I mentioned earlier. Now, ionones have the ability to short-circuit our sense of smell. The flower continues to exude its fragrance, but we lose the ability to smell it. Wait a minute or two, and its smell will blare again. Then it will fade again, and so on. How fascinating that Josephine, a woman of full-bodied sensuality, would choose as her trademark a scent that assaults the nose with a damn burst of odour 1 second, and the next leaves the nose virginal only to rampage yet again. No scent is more flirtatious, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. It plays hide and seek with our senses, and there's no way to get too much of it. I'm going to leave you with 3 really fascinating facts now about violets. Violets can be invisible to us, yet visible to bees. They possess a unique trait known as ultraviolet nectar guides, or what's otherwise known as bees purple. How cute is that? Bees purple. And these UV nectar guides are invisible to the human eye, but can be seen by bees and some other insects. And these UV patterns act as visual cues that guide pollinators directly to the flower's nectar, enhancing the efficiency of pollination. This remarkable adaptation illustrates the intricate co-evolution of flowers and their pollinators, showcasing how violets have evolved to communicate with bees in a spectrum of light beyond human perception. Second fascinating fact about violets is they have a dual flowering system. So violets produce 2 types of flowers. They have the showy, fragrant ones in the spring that are designed to attract the pollinators. And then later in the season, they have inconspicuous closed flowers which don't open at all. And these closed flowers actually self-pollinate and ensure seed production, providing a fail-safe mechanism for reproduction. And this dual strategy allows the violets to maximise their chances of survival and reproduction by attracting pollinators when possible and relying on self-pollination when necessary. And the final fascinating fact about violets is that they can talk to ants. Violets produce seeds that have a specialised structure called eleosome, which is rich. Sounds very posh. Eleosome. Now it's spelled E-L-A-I-O-S-O-M-E. And you pronounce it eleosome. And the eleosome is rich in lipids and proteins, and ants are attracted to these eleosomes, collecting and transporting these seeds back to their nest to feed their larvae. So the violets are producing seeds that contain this compound rich in lipids and proteins, which ants are attracted to. Therefore, the ants get those seeds, take the seeds back to their nest to feed their little baby larvae. And after the larvae have consumed these compounds known as eleosome, the ants then dispose of that seed in their waste. So they've taken what they wanted from that seed and they dispose of it in their waste, effectively planting it in a nutrient-rich environment. A bit like when you get rid of your seeds and vegetables and fruits and peelings and pips and things like that, and you put them into a compost heap. And this symbiotic relationship helps dispersal and germination of violet seeds. And this really demonstrates the plant's sophisticated strategy to enlist an army of ants to aid in their reproduction. So these facts I've just mentioned highlight the complexity and ingenuity of violets and underscore not just their subtle beauty in appearance, but also their interactions with the ecosystem. So the next time you walk past a beautiful deep purple violet, just remember how clever it is in its own survival, but also the beautiful, complex, sophisticated and various nuances that plant adds to a fragrance. And that concludes this episode of Fragrance Materials. I hope you enjoyed it. Do get in touch if you want me to discuss any of your favourite fragrance materials, and I will discover the most fascinating facts about them and give you examples of how they are used in perfumes, giving you tips and tricks of how to use them in fragrance, because these episodes are not just me telling you facts about fragrance materials, it's giving you hints of how to use them effectively in your perfumes, making you a better composer of scent. Gosh, I sound so posh. You wouldn't think that I was from Bolton. You know, when I was about 8 years old, my mum sent me to an elocution lessons because she said, do you know what, Melanie Jane? She said, as long as you've got a northern accent like that, she's never going to get anywhere in life. That's how I used to talk. And I thought, nowadays, I think, well, it's not done. Peter Kay's not done so bad, has he? He's from Bolton. Vernon Kay, also from Bolton, done really well for himself. So yeah, but I do have, you might be a bit confused by my accent sometimes, and it's because I lived in the north of England and my mum sent me to elocution lessons, but then also I lived in the south of England for a number of years. And if I talk like that and I said, oh, can I have half a pound of butterscotch, please? They'd be like, what? Don't understand anything you're saying. So I had to change my accent as well, even more. I had to refine it because people in the southeast of England didn't understand me, even though we're from the same country. And then I lived in Dubai for 20 years. So I had to refine my accent even more and talk a lot slower than, jabbering on. All right, love, how are you? You want a cup of tea? Oh, yeah, fancy a piece of toast and butter as well. And nobody would understand me if I talked like that when I was in Dubai. So don't be confused by my accent. My northern accent, which I'm very proud of, comes out mostly from time to time, but just a bit of a posher version. But then sometimes I put on a bit more of a posh accent, which is normally when I'm reading from excerpts for books and scripts and things like that, because I don't want to ramble on too much and go astray with my ramblings about fragrance, because I need to focus and keep myself in line with the subject. But so sometimes I'll sound like Northern, and then other times I'll sound a bit like Nigella Lawson. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying my podcast. Do get in touch and let me know if there's a specific subject related to fragrance, perfumery, essential oils, aromatherapy, or even the sense of smell that you would like me to discuss and research some incredible facts and bring that to you in my podcasts. So stay fabulous. Until the next time, a biento.